All right, Gianni Storm, you want to talk about what are we talking about, Gianni? We're talking about Biden wanting to allow transgender people who are biologically male to compete in traditionally
Yes,
women's only
executive
sports.
order.
So is this truth,
Yep.
lies, or shenanigans?
This is a truth. So, our new president just signed an executive order to allow transgender individuals to play in equally in the. I'm sorry, to play equally in sports. So, uh, a biologically a biological male who is transgendered into a woman can play in a female sports. Basically, if I said it right, you guys can help me.
And vice versa.
um,
And vice versa.
yeah, and vice versa. Yep. So quite a few people, quite a few female student athletes had an issue with this, and lawsuits have become involved due to um, these athletes claiming that this is unfair. One group prioritizes inclusion, and another group says that we want fairness and safety. Um, that's one sports study mentions that. Another one mentions at 1 year, the trans woman on average still has an advantage over the cis woman. And cis women, if you don't know what that is, it just means biologically female, like you were born a woman and you still are a woman, a straight woman. So in a separate study, for the first 2 years after starting hormones, the trans women in their review were able to do 10% more push-ups and 6% more sit-ups than their cisgender female counterparts. After 2 years, they were fairly equivalent to the cisgender women. And then there's another study that spoke about this as well. Their running times declined, and this is talking about track and field. Their running times declined as well, but 2 years on, trans women were still 12% faster on the 1.5 mile run that cisgender peers, than their cisgender peers, sorry. So basically, those are just comparing the difference between the cis women and their transgender counterparts. My question to you guys is, should transgender individuals compete in women's sports or vice versa? Transgender men compete in men's sports.
Yeah,
Is this
okay.
fair?
Um, I I'll go first, unless somebody else wants to go first.
Go ahead.
Go
All
for
right. Um, so Gianni, I had spoken to you and I told you I was going to try to find an argument to support transgender biological males competing in women's sports because I wanted to play devil's advocate. But honestly, I just couldn't find it.
Yeah.
I couldn't make that argument that, um, you know, I just couldn't make the argument. So, I mean, because if you look
Yeah.
at biological men, you know, they have hormones, they're born with hormones that provide muscle growth, bone density, growth, and height, all biologically produced biologically by men. And sports was never really a priority for women, in historically speaking, right? And it's just in the recent decades that women's sport kind of came to fruition. I mean, there's been women's sports, there's been tennis, there's been, but look at the WNBA, for example.
He said tennis.
I mean, because women could not compete against men in terms of WNBA. They still believe there's still people that believe they can. I still believe that there's, you can always go up. Part of it, but uh,
Why is that going up though? Like why do you keep saying that? You and I had an argument about this like maybe 5, 6 years
I
ago.
remember.
Simply because the NBA is over here and is a more popular league,
I
and
actually
the
remember.
WNBA is over here, does not mean that I'm up in my game, if you will. Doesn't mean I'm not as legitimate if I don't compete against men. I can be the best in my sport, and that's it. I don't have to validate anything by competing against a man.
I mean, I
That's
totally
ridiculous.
agree. That's the argument I'm making. I mean, you
No,
changed my
no,
mind 5 years ago. 5 years ago, you changed my mind. How about
it.
that? 5 years ago. So
You've
I'm actually
influenced him.
maybe I'm not using the right words, but I'm trying to make your argument. I really am because I do believe I agree. You have your lane. And you know trying to compete against men it's like going into a different lane, and it doesn't. I just don't see the need for it. But then you're looking at What you have to do is for transgender men, his biological men, to come into that lane makes it more difficult for those players to compete. I mean, there is an inequity there. It's not fair. I'm gonna leave it at that. But go ahead, Robbie. You want to go next? I know Lizzie has a lot
Like
to say, so we're gonna let her go
like
last.
you, Neo, I do struggle with this topic because on one hand, I completely accept that people have the right to identify with
Yeah,
their appropriate gender. I'm all for inclusivity. Um, and I respect the spirit of fair competition. A biological male who identifies as female, despite any treatments that they've received, still, for the most part, have the morphology and hormones of a biological male, which you said, Neil, does give them an advantage physically in competition. So, in general, not always, male competitive athletes perform at a higher level than their female counterparts. This is in general. And I mean, if you want to bring that into question, take a look at the Olympic records. They speak for themselves and it documents it. Um, this situation creates an unfair advantage that some will exploit for the sake of
that's what's involved in
scholarships, endorsements,
exploitation.
money. Biological females in women's sports are being placed at a serious disadvantage here. And there is something that needs to be done to address that. And I think that there's a couple of ways they can go about it. In the spirit of competition, you can have athletes compete with their biological sex counterparts, regardless of how they identify. So, a biological male would compete against a biological male, a biological female would compete against a biological female, regardless of how they identify at this point in their life. Or this violates the spirit of inclusivity, create a separate league or division where trans athletes can compete freely and fairly against one another. It just balances the playing field. It's a
It's a tough
slippery slope
situation, to be
argument.
honest
It
with you,
really is no
because
good answer for it. But women, yes, biological female athletes are being placed at a disadvantage now where some people can absolutely exploit the system.
the question I have, and I'm gonna see if Lizzie can answer this. So where does the line stop, right? Because, for example, let's say we say, okay, transgender females who were biologically males can compete against women, and then where does it stop where we say gay men should be able to compete? Because we're all it's all discrimination based upon gender, right? If we're breaking it down from men and women sports, that's discrimination. And you're saying men can't compete in women's sports and women can't compete in men's sports. That's discrimination based upon gender. So when we start blurring the lines between the two, then where does it end? Because then we talk about, can a gay man say, "Hey, look, I'm gay. I should be able to compete in women's sports," which
No, that's
legitimately,
not. That's a false.
That's
That's not a
I'm
rational
okay.
equivalent
But
because
even
gay
if
men
we're not
are
saying gay
because
men, if I
gay men aren't
decide,
identifying as women. Gay men aren't identifying as women. You're talking about two totally different
right,
things.
okay,
Gay men identify as men. So they would never have that conversation as, okay, I'm gay, so let me just go and run and compete against a woman. Like that's something completely different.
it's not completely different. It's
It
not.
is completely different because they don't identify. It's not a homosexual is not a gender issue. It's a sexual orientation issue.
Fair enough.
They're two completely different things.
Fair enough. Okay,
fair.
I'll accept that. But what if me as a
So
man,
do you think it's
me as not a gay man, decides that I want to play in women's sport, right? Because you're discriminating against me as a man, saying that I can't compete in women's sport. Then,
so you're saying like include everybody because we're including
right? I
transgender?
mean, I'm not suggesting that. I think that I don't think that should be the way to go. But I'm saying, where does the line?
Oh, where does it end?
Where do we stop? Where's the line stop? What do we say? What defines man and woman? First of all, then you know, it's
My
just a
goodness.
very difficult. What I'm saying is a very difficult thing to deal with because it's hard to define, especially when people are defining themselves as they should be able to. Um, but what's stopping me as someone who maybe can't compete in my level, and I want to compete against women instead because I feel like I can compete against women. You know, what's to
I
stop me from
mean,
doing that? There's nothing to stop me from
it's
doing that.
not black and white, it is gray. So I feel like with transgender individuals that want, I feel like to a level, yeah, let people play who they want to play against. But this is a game, though. You know what I mean? There is an end goal to win. Like if games didn't, like if sports didn't have like the competitive nature, sure, we can all have this hobby and we can all play. But I feel like you have a clear advantage, so you're clearly gonna always win. That's not fair. So I feel like my question was like, is it fair for them to be included? Um, it's not. I'm not really asking like, should they be included? Because yeah, they should. I feel like everybody should. But is it fair?
Okay, Lizzie,
Hmm.
let you close this one out.
Let me just start by saying that this is not an easy topic.
It's
This
not.
is not a topic that has a definitive answer on either side. As far as this just being a game, sports is a profession to a lot of people. Like a lot of these professional athletes have been training since they were,
Mm-hmm.
6, 7, 8 years old.
2 years
They
old.
they play the same sport, in elementary school, in junior high school, college, and they do that in the anticipation of making money. Okay. I don't have the answer for it. Like I don't know what the right answer is that won't offend someone on either side.
Sorry
I
for
kind of do
Right,
buy
right.
into what Rob said, in that maybe we do have a special category for transgender athletes. Just like we have a category for men's and women's basketball, men's and women's track, men's volleyball, men's wrestling, women's wrestling. Maybe we have a special category for transgenders. But let's not pretend that it's just an easy transition on both sides, that the competition is fair on both sides, because it is not. Any competition where you have to use a drug to make you eligible means that you shouldn't be playing to begin with, at least
Yeah.
not in that
Yeah.
particular category. Any competition where you have some type of advantage that's been enhanced, not by nature, but by something on the outside, is not fair. It's not fair. And like a lot of these stories you hear are about track and field, but it's not just track and field. It's not just running a race. It's also a very prominent issue in girls wrestling, because mostly for wrestling, it's at the high school and maybe college level. I don't think it's an issue with like professional Olympic wrestling, but I could be wrong. Mike Winter and I had a conversation earlier this week where he said that it's definitely an issue in volleyball, again
I
in
imagine.
track.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
I mean, who knows? But if you pay attention to the way
Male
people
volleyball
compete in
players are
sports,
vicious. Mike Winter
if
Yeah.
you
is a
pay
vicious volleyball player.
whatever, he ain't nobody.
Oh,
If
really?
you pay attention to the way men and women compete in sports, there are very few professional sports where they compete against each other, where the two sexes compete against each other. And if they do, it's usually not in a physical competition. And there's a reason
Mm.
for that. Physiology plays a huge factor in whether or not it's a level playing field. And so again, I don't know the answer. But we can't just sit back and be like, oh, well, we're not being fair, or we are, discriminating, we're bigots, we're no, I'm not. I'm saying I don't know how to fix this. I'm saying it's not an easy answer. And whatever answer that, folks come up with the governing bodies come up with as we move forward with this, someone is going to be upset on either side.
Yeah.
Someone is going to be
Yeah.
upset.
I was sorry. I was
Agreed.
laughing in the middle of your thing. I wasn't laughing at you. Mike Winter. Mike Winter said, "Don't try to kiss up now, Bama," because he's been yelling at me in the comments
Oh, yeah, he
about my
has.
comments.
But actually, I
He
want to
said make
address
informed
Daria.
comments.
I do want to address Daria Winter, because I did say that I completely accept that people have the right to identify with their appropriate gender. And when I say that, I mean appropriate to themselves. That makes them feel validated as a person. So thank you for challenging me and making me unpack the language, but that's absolutely what I meant by saying their appropriate gender.
Yeah, and I hear what you're
Appropriate to
saying,
them.
Lizzie, and also I hear you. I hear you, Mike Winter, on what you're saying as
I
well.
can't say nothing. Pay him no mind.
No, they were saying the same thing you were saying. He was just correcting, saying it's not the same. So I agree. I understand. I hear you. That's why we have the
Um,
conversations.
So you have this particular story pulled up right now. So this is kind of a story about someone on the other side of the coin. So Mac Beggs is a transgender male. Most of the story, what we've been talking about up until this point, has been about transgender females. Mac Beggs is a transgender male. Mac Beggs was born biologically as a female, has transgendered into, has transformed or transformed, I guess, transformed, transitioned into a male.
Transition.
Right. Wants to compete as a male, but whatever state he lives in, the sports governing body does not allow that. By law, by their rules, they say that you have to compete under the gender, under the sex that is on your birth certificate, which for Mac is a woman, is a female. So he, as a wrestler who has been taking testosterone shots and other hormones and what have you, has to compete against girls, and 100% emphatically in this new and improved version, physically new and improved version of himself, he's competing against girls and is winning hands down. And that's not what he intended to do. He wants to compete against boys, wants to compete against people that he would fairly be able to be in competition with. So that's another side of the coin where a lot of the rules, a lot of the governing bodies, they're not catching up to what this is. A lot of people, are like thinking, okay, if I don't talk about it, if I don't think about it, it's just going to go away. If I just, put it to the side, it's not going to be a big thing. And it's increasingly, year after year, becoming bigger and more complicated. And at some point, we do need to figure out how we are going to address this, because transgenders are not going away.
No,
Just
and I
because we
totally
close
agree
our
with
eyes
that.
They
doesn't
shouldn't,
mean
no.
What's
so.
the
We need to
answer?
figure out how we're going to address this. What is the answer?
And that's what I'm asking. That was part of my questions. That I don't know what the answer is. I'm like, where do we draw the line? Do because again, there have been a lot of strides in women's sports throughout the years. I remember the significance of the WNBA coming along, and that was a significant thing because women in sports, they couldn't get paid in basketball
Yeah.
because they couldn't join the NBA. So now they're able to join the NBA, but now we're saying that potentially, people in the D League, who are transgender can maybe step in and be WNBA players, and dominate the WNBA. But then doesn't that take away from the NBA player? Especially again if you're taking hormones, even if it's like Castor Semenya,
Samantha,
Semenya. Yeah, I
who,
mean,
who just let me
she's a
qualify,
woman.
because a lot of people get confused. Caster Semenya is not transgender.
Yep.
She's intersex. Okay, she was born with some stuff, more stuff, on the male station than she cared to have, than the average person who is a woman is. Not her fault. It's a natural process
Yeah.
for her. However, she's a track athlete. The Olympics are saying if she wants to compete, the IAAF are saying if she wants to compete, then she has to drug up to bring down her testosterone levels, which she is emphatically against, because she's like, one, I don't know what those drugs are going to do to me, not only short term, but long term. Two, it's not a fair competition then if I have to drug, because everybody else, I don't know what's in those drugs. Maybe it's going to show up as a PED, a
Mm-hmm.
performing enhancing drug.
Yeah.
Like, so she's saying, I should not have to do this. I am a woman. I am biologically a woman. I have done nothing to alter that physically, ever.
Yep.
But they won't let her compete unless she agrees to start taking drugs or to have an operation to fix her testosterone levels, to fix what is an overcompensation, if you will, on the male side of the equation.
Yep.
So that's another part of the story.
All right. Ton of
And
comments.
again, we haven't caught up to any of this science.
Ton of
We haven't.
comments.
Exactly.
And we're way over time. So police unions need. Oh, I'm sorry, I went backwards too far. Saima Fatima, anyone should be allowed to compete. Derek Winter says what is appropriate in quotes? Unpack
And
terminology
that
thrown out as if
and
it's
that's why I
meaning
That was
unpacked, I saw that
uncontested
comment,
that
self-evident.
was
and I
about
unpacked
well
that earlier.
clarified.
Oh, that's right. You did
Yeah,
say that.
that
All
clarified that.
right. And then Mike Winter says, no, Neo, that is not the same. Use the
You
Olympics
read
very, very
old
strict
comments.
standard.
We have
Uh,
moved on.
and then
Yeah.
Sonia
Sonia.
C. Elias says, so can he fairly be in competition with men? I think she's talking about Beggs. What's his name, Beggs?
Oh yeah.
When he has taken hormones transition, he is still biologically a woman. Can
Mm-hmm.
he fairly be in competition with men?
And that was my question. That was
Because
my statement at the beginning. Like, if you have to
that's
take
safe.
drugs to compete,
I
how
mean,
is that fair?
he could potentially
How is
have
that
more testosterone than a natural man because
Absolutely, because of the increased testosterone treatments in order to get him up to that
fair?
level,
Mm-hmm,
can
mm-hmm.
absolutely, if decides to inject the testosterone or take the testosterone treatment at an ideal window before competition, it would still it wouldn't come up as a banned substance because it's supposed to be in his bloodstream as a transgendered individual.
yeah. All right, we've got to move on to the next one. Robbie, I did get your message, so yeah, if we can save your topic for the next show. All right, let's jump
Let's
into.
just go to the game. It's 9:09. Let's
All right,
just go to
all right, well, all right, good hot topic. Those were some pretty deep hot topics. Pretty deep hot topics. So that was good. All right, we're gonna jump right into the game. Let's go into it.